All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar on the basics of Scandinavian research. My name is Kathleen McKenzie, Education and Programming Manager here at American Ancestors New England Historic Genealogical Society, and I will be moderating today's session. American Ancestors is a nonprofit organization supported by our members and donors. We provide resources and expertise in nearly all aspects of family history and are pleased to offer such programming for our members and friends around the world. This program today is brought to you by the Brew Family Learning Center. Our presenter today is genealogist Sheilagh Doerfler. Sheilagh joined American Ancestors New England Historic Genealogical Society as a member of the Research Services team in 2013. She received her BA in History and Communication from the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Sheilagh is a frequent contributor to American Ancestors magazine and the American Ancestors NEHGS blog Vita Brevis. Her areas of expertise include DNA, adoption, New England, New Netherland, Ireland, Atlantic Canada, Quebec, Ontario, and of course, Scandinavia. All right, so without further ado, let's go ahead and turn things over to Sheilagh.
Well, thank you so much, Kathleen, and thanks to everyone for being here this afternoon as we talk about Scandinavia. So the geographical definition of Scandinavia, it certainly differs, but at its core, Scandinavia is Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. Other definitions group in Finland and Greenland and Iceland. Today, I am including Finland into the presentation, and many of you at home might be thinking, Finns generally aren't considered Scandinavians, but I am doing so this afternoon because genealogically speaking, Finland generally maintains the same Lutheran record systems as its neighbors. Historically, it's always been a part of Scandinavia. It was a part of Sweden until 1809. And the record systems that we'll be learning about today and how they work together and how they're set up, generally, you can find that in Finland. So to be inclusive, to bring in our Finnish descendants here, I am including Scandinavia. So with this being said, there are a lot of challenges that we face when we're looking at and researching our Scandinavian ancestors. And those include probably first and foremost is the language barrier and handwriting. We're dealing with 4 different types of languages and lots of different cramped Gothic handwriting that we have to decipher when we're looking at original church records. There's also the patronymic surname system that we have to navigate. And of course, in direct result of that system, lots of common names. And as well, folks tended to change their surnames upon immigration, and that can be a big hurdle to try to figure out if you're identifying the right person. One of the hardest things to do is to identify that home parish of our immigrant ancestor. So we'll be looking at some strategies of how we can tackle that today. And again, accessing and understanding the record system. Some of these record systems and different types of records are just generally found in Scandinavia, and they can be, at first blush, a little difficult to work with and how they interact with one another. So we'll be looking at some examples of different types of records this afternoon. So it's not uncommon to come across records that look like this, and they can be a bit scary and intimidating. First of all, we have a different language here that we're looking at, a different alphabet. Lots of abbreviations in Scandinavian records. And, the Gothic handwriting can be very difficult to read as well. So, with some help and some practice, I guarantee that you'll be tackling records like this in the future. But how can we do that? I highly recommend using everything that's been published, created out there to help you in your research. And that includes handbooks, manuals, and guides. On the handout, I've included some of the best that I've come across. These guides provide helpful translations of record headings, like I have referenced here at the bottom. There's handwriting guides. They also explain the context of the records, how they work together, why they were created. Sometimes I feel that's so helpful in research to understand why a record was created, because if we do understand that, we can get the most out of that record. There's also really handy genealogical word lists. I use these constantly. So if I'm doing Scandinavian research, I have on my desk at all times a handbook. So I recommend you can get them, via interlibrary loan. There's lots of great handbooks on thriftbooks.com. Visit your local bookstore. So again, try to incorporate them into your genealogical library. This is everyone at home is probably familiar with the Family Search wikis. These are free, fantastic guides that have been created that are out there to help you. I've linked quite a few of them on the handout, but some of them, there's video tutorials, there's alphabets, there's examples of information that you'll see in these different parish records. So use everything that's out there to help you do a better job. And the patronymic surname system, it is derived from the given name of the father. So we have a suffix applied after the given name. So again, we here have Magnus son and Magnus daughter. So son of Magnus, daughter of Magnus. And it can be confusing because it changes every generation. Once you're working with this consistently, it makes a lot of sense. It becomes kind of second nature, but it can be tricky to kind of get a hold on. And a word to the wise here is that, as you know, every country spells their suffixes different ways. You'll find SCN generally in Denmark and sometimes in Norway, SON in Sweden. And you really can't confirm the origins by the spelling of the suffix. Spelling changes constantly, especially when people immigrate. They may be spelling it different ways. The enumerator may be spelling it a certain way. So just because someone is named Carl Hansen SCN doesn't mean he's from Denmark. So it can possibly hint at origins, but it does not confirm them. And so this is just a quick little visual representation of the patronymic. We have Mari Olasdottir. She is the daughter of Ole Gulliksen. So we have her. We see the suffix on the end of Ole. And in turn, Ole Gulliksen is the son of Gullik Gundersen. So we see that patronymic being brought through here. Typing things out visually is a great way to organize information. If you're a visual learner like I am, I often make these little maps here just to make sure that I have an understanding of things. You can do it in a pedigree chart, but a visual representation is a great way to view the patronymic system. So the patronymic system, it ceases in each country at different times. Denmark is probably one of the first countries that tries to end the system with the 1856 naming law. But in rural areas, it's practiced until the late 19th century. And Finland as well. We'll be talking about Finnish surnames later in the class, but Western Finland adopted a patronymic surname system. So you will see that utilized into the 19th century. And on the handout, I have a little bit more of information about these different naming laws. The same with Norway and Sweden. Pretty much all of Scandinavia, you will see the practice until the end of the 1800s. When there's a push to try to westernize surnames here, to try to have folks adopt a fixed hereditary surname. So one surname that is passed down from generation to generation. So keep that in mind. If you have Scandinavian ancestors that are immigrating, after the turn of the century, you might come into some of your ancestors that have a fixed surname, and then preceding generations will have the patronymic. So that can be a little bit of a hiccup too that we have to overcome, but it's important to understand what's going on. Farm names are also used as a surname as well. You will see them tacked on to the end of the patronymic as a way to distinguish folks. So if you have, a bunch of Hans Larsens in one parish, folks will use that farm name to distinguish themselves. Sometimes upon immigration, your immigrant ancestor may have adopted this farm name as their surname. So you will see that too. And we'll look at some examples a little bit later. The big thing that I want to state up front is that farm names denote the current residence. So it doesn't hint at, confirm at origins. It's where they are at that time. And when people move from farm to farm, that farm name changes. With Finnish surnames, sometimes you can get a hint at a very early origin of a family with a farm name. But generally speaking, this name is fluid, and you will see that when you look at moving in and out records, the arrivals and departures that are part of Lutheran church records. We'll look at those a little bit later. But again, it's the current residence. Occupational surnames too. These are far less common than patronymics or farm names. Sometimes, you'll see the surname Smed, S-M-E-D, for Smith, or Muller for Miller, Fiska for fisherman. So lots of different types of surnames. The helpful guides that I've linked on the handout will walk you through these different types of surnames, give you a list of some of them. So just, again, use the help that's already out there. Another challenge is the surname change that we talked about briefly here. So, sometimes after the immigration or the passing of that surname law that, most of it happens in the 20th century, folks are taking different surname. So they're keeping the patronymic surname that they have currently. Some folks take their father's patronymic, or they take a farm name. Some Finns will adjust their surnames. They'll drop the en, which is if you see en, often that is a Finnish suffix that can be, you're working with a Finnish family. But so surnames are being altered, and that's a challenge. So we'll be talking about this a little bit later. It's like, how can we know if our ancestor changed their name, things like that. So I'll give you a little example of folks changing their names here. So this is even within a family unit, as different brothers and sisters taking surnames. So here we have the Johannesson family in Fredrikstad, Norway in the 1891 census. This is a transcribed version from the Norway National Archives here. So at the arrow here, we have Samueline Johannesson. She's the mom. And if we go over a little bit over to the right here, under marital status, she has an E there, and that is E for enka, or widow. So she's a widowed woman. These are all of her kids here. And we can all see here, they all have the surname Johannesson. So just 4 years later, we have Soren Jarls Carlson getting married in 1895. So this is Samueline's son. And in that 4-year change, he has adopted Carlson. So if we kind of go over here to that second arrow, we see that his father is named Carl August Johannesson. So he has chosen the traditional patronymic here. He's taking his father's given name and adding the suffix. We can see 4 years prior, in 1891, everyone had adopted the father's patronymic, Johannesson, even Samueline. And again, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but most Scandinavian women maintain their maiden names. And here's a representation of that family here. At the top, we have Carl August Johannesson. So he died in 1882, so 9 years before the enumeration of that census. And we have Samueline, his widow. And if we look down at the children here, we can see that several of the brothers and sisters adopt the surname Carlson, so the traditional patronymic, while others are sticking with Johannesson here. And that can be pretty confusing. Like I said, if you have later, if your Scandinavian ancestors came a little bit later than the 19th century, you'd be running into this name change. It's like, well, wait a minute, this doesn't quite jive. So it's important to have that context, is that this is about the time period when folks are standardizing that surname. And to overcome that, it's really important to build the foundation of your family on strong primary sources. So link the family with, at this time, civil records, church records, census records, moving in and out records. So look for continuity to prove that they are, in fact, the same person and are, in fact, changing their name. So just to touch on this again, is I'll be talking about this a lot, but it's performing an exhaustive search. This is so important when we're doing genealogical research, is that you really have to get your hands on every record that you can. And whether you're dealing with a surname change in Scandinavia, or if you're dealing with a surname change of your immigrant ancestor, trying to push them back, it's key to link them with strong records. So look for those passenger records and naturalization records to see if you can find the home parish of your ancestor, and always look for consistent information. That's the key. Other folks change their given name. They anglicize their name. So these are some pretty obvious ones. Carl for Charles, and Johannes for John, and Marin for Mary. There are lists. There's some family search wikis, and there are lists in some of these manuals that will give you synonyms. So when you are searching Scandinavian records, you'll have an idea. Some of the synonyms aren't as obvious as Johannes and John. So again, use that published material that's out there. This is probably one of the biggest questions that I get, is common names. How can we distinguish our ancestors with common names? Because of the patronymic surname system, we have lots of Kari Lars daughters in one parish, or even in one town say in Minnesota. Try to use those farm names. Pay attention to the farm names that your ancestors are listed in. You will see farm names listed in US Lutheran church records, as well as Scandinavian ones. And we'll see some examples a little bit later. But this is a way that the parish priest and the individual is saying, hey, I'm from this farm. This is me. I'm different from this Hans Larsen. And birth date. Scandinavians know their birth date, and we'll talk about that a little bit. It's much different than some of our other ancestors. I have a lot of Irish ancestry. They did not know when they were born. You have to add +or-5 on their birth dates. So there's a much higher rate of literacy in these countries. And we have to carefully trace their movements with arrival and departure records. Lutheran parish priests recorded those arriving in their parish and leaving in their parish. The other thing too is we want to build a network around our ancestor. So we want to know who their family are, who they're interacting with. So if you're in Minnesota, you don't know if this Hans Larsen is your Hans Larsen, check out those land records. Is he buying and selling land with the same set of people at the same time? This could distinguish your ancestor from the other Hans Larsens running around. And make a timeline. This is a great visual way to separate folks. So if you have two people with the same name, make a timeline supported by strong primary sources. So if you have vital records, pepper that in with tax, land, and vital, you'll really start to see a separation between the folks. And this is our ultimate goal. Of any genealogist, it's identifying where your ancestor's from. And this can be pretty tricky. Overseas, we have some of the best genealogical collection in the world. The most comprehensive set of records is in Scandinavia. So it's just getting across the pond. And, that's where the exhaustive search comes in. So making sure you get every vital record you can. Getting the kids' vital records. Does that list mom and dad's birthplace? Always get church records. The majority of these ancestors will be Lutheran. We'll talk about some different religions later, but these are fantastic records that exist for most places in the US. They often record birthplace, immigration, things like that. And always try to get those naturalization records, passenger records. One of the big things that I think people forget is learning more about the local community. Many Scandinavians participated in chain migration. So they followed others from, followed brothers and sisters or neighbors from home to a new location. So learning about that community, who settled there, how it was settled, may reveal or hint at the origins of your ancestor. And lastly, cluster research, which I hinted about before, but that's basically the fan club, family, associates, and neighbors, understanding who your ancestors interacting with. I can't say this enough, is church records. Always try to get them if they're available. Witnesses to marriages or godparents, they can be family members or neighbors that we can then in turn research to learn more about our ancestor. They might reveal a specific birthplace, and they also often give information about when someone moved into a parish and sometimes immigration information. So they're an incredibly rich set of records. I'm sure that some of you have run into these evangelical Lutheran collections on Ancestry. There's some really great comprehensive databases there. Family search as well. If you search by the catalog and by location, you'll find really great Lutheran collections as well. And, if you're, say, you've searched these two places, work with the local congregation. Sometimes they maintain them on site. So do the legwork, try to get your hands on them, and you will be rewarded. So this is an example. This is the first Lutheran church in St. Paul, Minnesota here. And we look at the parish headings here. So we have the name, when and where they're baptized. So we have a birth date, we have a birthplace, we have when this person was married, when they arrived in America, and when they arrived to this place. So if this is your ancestor, you've just really struck gold here. So we have Johann Alfred Johannesson, and then in parentheses here, we see the surname of Blom. He has assumed his wife's surname. In census records and in later records, that's what he and his children are known by. It could be possible that he took her surname because there might be a bunch of Johannessons, in the community. That sometimes happened. I don't know how common that he would assume his wife's name, but they're usually looking ways to distinguish themselves. So that might be, it's curious to see, but this church record would prove that he had changed his name. So it's a really huge record. We have his birthplace at Langamala in Kalmar, Sweden, and his wife's birthplace in Skaraborg County. And also we have, when he was born, which is the 31st of January, 1844. And we'll go over about how the birth dates are written. But so just this simple Lutheran church record has, given origins, immigration, proved a name change. Kids are listed here too. So we can just see the type of genealogical information that's present. And again, not everyone's a Lutheran. There are many Danes joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and immigrated to the United States. There's Moravians, Quakers, Russian Orthodox folks, and members of the Methodist Church. So if you have an inkling that your ancestor may have joined another church, there are other types of records that are available. But overwhelmingly, most folks are Lutheran. So here, we just have a listing of just some of the different religions practiced in Scandinavia. I've mentioned naturalization records several times. They are some of the more powerful, records for any of our immigrant ancestors, but, they'll give birthplace, birth date, sometimes spouse and children, and immigration information. And, here we see Carl Hansen Luton. So he's adopting that second surname there, the farm name. And if we look at that arrow there, he's born in Luton. So he is, tracing him forward, you may find that he adopts that farm name as his surname. Naturalization records, in the past, 10 years is a major push to digitize them. Many are available on Family Search if you search by the county. Some will be found. Don't forget to look at cities as well. Like New York City has a massive collection of naturalization records, but if your ancestors settled in a city, also look by the city as well. Ancestry has great collections, and Fold 3 as well. If for some reason, if you see on a census that your ancestor naturalized, if you're in the 1900 federal census and you see that little NA there, but you look and family search ancestry Fold 3, you can't find any. I would suggest, reaching out to your local NARA, your, National Archives branch. They often house a lot of naturalization records. And so they may have a collection that just didn't get digitized. So it's really on, the onus is on you to do that really, that legwork, to go out of your way. So much is available to us these days. We're so lucky. We're the luckiest genealogists that have ever existed, because we have everything at our fingertips. And I think, when things get a little difficult, we tend to not want to go that extra mile. And I'm guilty of that as well. But when it comes to things like these church records and naturalization records, we really have to go that extra mile to make sure we get our hands on them. Community history. I talked a little bit about this at the get-go, but again, just like any of our immigrant ancestors, Scandinavians settled together. They participated in chain migration. So you might find that, younger siblings followed their older established siblings and settled in that new town. You may find that a whole, parish kind of picked up and moved to a new community. So really looking at that local history, community history is really essential for these Scandinavian immigrants. There's been, I think about Spring Grove, Minnesota, which is one of the earliest Norwegian settlements. There are community studies. So, look in WorldCat, work with your local historical and genealogical society. They're the best resource for this local history. Things that, NEHGS, Family Search doesn't have, is this local knowledge. So learn more about the community. If you're hitting those brick walls where you're saying, I have everything on my ancestor, I don't know the mother's maiden name, so how can I, search records in Denmark? Well, make sure you learn about this community. Did a bunch of Danes settle together? So again, I can't say that enough, is how important it is, all genealogy is local. And finally, cluster research, which I've been, speaking about, is, the fan club, family, associates, and neighbors. So who does your ancestor interact with? That's their fan club. So looking at these church records, who are the godparents to their children? Who are the witnesses to their marriage? Who's living next door in a census? Are they buying and selling land from these same people? Do they have siblings? So it's your job, if you're hitting a brick wall, is to learn about each of these folks. Can you find the origins of the neighbor who's enumerated next to your ancestor in 1870 and 1880? If you can find those origins, can you find your ancestor there as well? So cluster research is one of the more powerful strategies that we have to break down brick walls in genealogy. So, but when you're doing it, it's really important to stay organized. We often know so much about our own ancestors, we can rattle dates off our head, but that won't be the same kind of accuracy that of our 1870 census neighbor here. So write it down, stay organized, keep track of what you're researching. And we have a fantastic free source. It's creating a research plan for cluster research. It was a webinar given by Lindsay Fulton. It's linked here at the bottom. So if you're new to cluster research, take a look at this video. You'll learn some fantastic ways to stay organized. And I guarantee that you'll find some new information about your ancestor. Okay, without further ado, let's hop across the pond here. So Norway, over 800,000 immigrants between 1820s and the 1920s, and I'm sure that number is even higher. They are Norway and Sweden are the major countries that contribute to Scandinavian migration to the United States. And there are quite a few push factors, so reasons for people to immigrate in Norway. And some of those is the lack of farmland. If we think about what Norway looks like, is that it's very rocky and mountainous, and it maintains a cold climate. So when the population of Norway kind of booms in the mid to late 1800s, there's not enough farmland, adequate farmland to support these folks. There's poor crops, it leads to financial depression. So it really spurs folks to immigrate and seek a better future in the United States. There are so many sources available to folks with Norwegian ancestry. So these are some of the major ones that you will encounter. And the core of it is the Lutheran church record. So baptisms, marriages, burials, confirmations. But there's also fantastic census records, probate records, court records, military records at your fingertips. So much of it has been digitized and is free and available to you. So you're a very lucky person if you have Norwegian ancestry. This is Digital Arkivet. This is the digitized section of the National Archives of Norway. This is the English version here. Most of these websites have an English version. Again, it's not perfect, but it's pretty great. So you can navigate it pretty easily. So here we have the different sections here: parish, census, court records, probate records. And this is a typical entry that you'll get. So I'm looking at Sheilagh Parish here in Vestfold County. This is a typical return here. You fill in your information on the left here, and these are the returns that you get. So each act, so when I say act, I mean baptism, marriage, is abbreviated. The Scandinavians love their abbreviations, and it can be very confusing. There are abbreviation lists in a lot of guides. There are abbreviations on the Family Search wikis. So keep that in mind, that help is out there for you. So if we look for DP here, that's an abbreviation for dupta, or baptism. VI is marriage, GR is burial. So, and once you pop these open, you'll be brought through beautiful scans that you can download. They're very clear for your research. They also have a pretty good searching feature that you can do a comprehensive search of records. A word to the wise, though, is that the spelling of our ancestors' names does change quite a bit. So I would, before you kind of delve into this, I would make sure that you really have an understanding of your ancestor, where they're living, their birth date, family members, things like that, how their name is being represented before you even try this. Because you might say, all right, I know my Carl Hansen is from Sheilagh Parish, and you put it in and nothing comes up, and you're like, what the heck? This isn't working. I'd say this is more of you feel very comfortable. You've done quite a bit of work. Sometimes it doesn't always accept English characters. It wants Norwegian characters, the diacritic marks and things like that. So it is available to you. I would make sure you have a good foundation before you use it. So here's an example of a Norwegian baptismal record. So the dupta. So this is an 1879 record. As we see, it has a really nice format here. It's on a printed book. I think in about 1814, around then, that's when they started using these printed forms here. Before, much more difficult to read. So generally speaking, boys will be on the top, girls will be on the bottom. That's not always the case, but you will see that. And that will continue with burial records too. You'll have males at the top and females at the bottom. So let's take a closer look at this baptism here. This is a pretty standard baptism that you'll see used for quite a few years here, but it's always from left to right here. We have the actual birth date, the baptism, the kid's name, and legitimate and illegitimate. So you'll see this, pretty much with every Scandinavian baptismal record if the child is legitimate. And the priest will write in there illegitimate. You know, they'll just get it right out in the open there. And then if the child is illegitimate, generally you'll just see the mom's name. Then, you know, we have the parents' full name. They'll have a residence, so what farm they're living on, and their job. And then we have a bunch of witnesses. So these are all the godparents, and sometimes their farm name will be listed too. But you know, these are generally really close to the parents. So these people mean something to our parents. They're part of our ancestors cluster. So if we're in a brick wall in Sheilagh Parish, we want to learn more about these folks. And again, sometimes you'll see the priest name there, and then another note about legitimacy. And so these are these document headings that I've been talking about here. These are available on Family Search. There's a nice PDF. I've linked that on the handout, but it gives the translation. So this is, you know, I did not look at that baptism and, you know, read it and translate everything. I knew this existed. I went and accessed the English version. So the work has been done. The hard work has been done. You know, use it to your advantage. Use those tools that are out there for you. And I alluded to this earlier, but Scandinavians know their birth date. So if we see here on this slide, birth dates, they rarely varied amongst records. So, you know, this is not the golden rule. You will see some variation with some folks who did not know their birthday. But the Lutheran church record system captured birth dates on so many different occasions. You'll see, because there's a plethora of records, there's many opportunities for the birth date to be recorded. There's a real push for literacy amongst the church, wanted the folks to be literate. And they carried that birth date knowledge with them. So sometimes you'll see someone, a Scandinavian person, their tombstone, and it'll say they died at 74 years, 11 months and 3 days. If you do that calculation, you know, and you have their original baptism, more often than not, in my experience, it's lined up pretty well, sometimes off by a few days. The birth date is a great way to distinguish your ancestors, particularly when you're in Scandinavia. Pay attention to that date. And again, the birth dates are abbreviated in kind of a funny way with fractions. So if we look here, 79, 9 over 8, it's just August 9th, 1879. And so if we go to the slide here, well, this is a moving in record. So these are all the folks moving into the parish in 1870. And we can see how their birth dates are represented. So this is a pretty standard practice throughout Scandinavia, is birth dates being represented this way. I remember when I was first doing Scandinavian research, I was like, what is this? And it takes a little bit of, you know, getting used to, but you'll generally see this pattern in all records. And a tip on maiden names. Women generally maintained their maiden names during the patronymic surname system. And so this is a huge assist to us. As we know, female ancestors are always more difficult to research than male ancestors. So we have a little bit of a leg up where we know, at least know dad's name. You know, marriages and sometimes burials, particularly when they're earlier, do not always reveal mom and dad. They'll give the, you know, where they live, their occupation, how old they were, and what they died, but not always mom and dad. So these maiden names are really important. Again, after all the name change law legislations, a lot of them required women to take their husband's surname. So that's sort of the end of that era. And, you know, as we saw in that example from Fredrikstad in Norway in 1891, Samueline had already taken her husband's surname. But it's pretty much a guarantee for these earlier Scandinavian generations that they're keeping their names. And here's just an example in the 1865 census. We see these two women. They're both married. They're listed as Kona, or wife, his wife, Hannes Kona. And we can see that they are maintaining their own surnames. And so where the children all are taking their father's patronymic surname. So a little gift for all of us who are researching our female ancestors. My favorite records are the arrivals and the removals. You will see these in all Scandinavian countries. It is a practice, within the Lutheran Church, is that the parish priest recorded movements of his parishioners. So he recorded folks leaving and folks moving in, and then folks immigrating outside of the country. And there's such rich records. They not only capture like residence and birth date and things like that, but they also can be vital record replacements. So if someone died, if someone married, things like that. These are the records I was talking about that help link your ancestor to make sure you're looking at the right Mari Olasdottir. So say she is a servant in a household, as many young, Norwegian women were. They would leave their home, their family's household, and become a piga or a servant in someone else's house. How do I know if that's my Mari? Well, you would use these arrivals and removals. You would trace her leaving her home parish and arriving in a new parish. And the parish priest would capture her birth date, where she was from. That's how you know that you have the right Mari. And that's the way that you're going to tackle that common name problem, is to consistently and accurately link her as she moves along. So here's a pretty typical moving out record. It's from 1879. So here's a little bit of translation from the headings here. So we have the year the person's moving. So 1875 here. They're moving to. So this first family here is moving to Sweden. The full name and status of the person leaving. So generally when you see status, that means occupation, their birth year, and then the contents and date of certificate. So that's really just the information regarding their birth, marriage, confirmation, things like that. So it's really clear that this first family is not known to the parish priest, because he doesn't know much about them. He doesn't know their birth dates here. We just have the birth year. And we just see he doesn't know anything about their baptism or anything like that. So let's take a closer look at that second entry. So the second entry really has much more rich information. So this is for Ingebret Jonsson Nygaard. So if we see here, he's headed to North America in 1879. That Nygaard is his residence or his farm name. If we move a little bit over, we see we have pretty much every date of every date that we need to know about Ingebret. So his birth date is 21 September 1861. And if we move a little bit over, there's a small d in front of the next numbers here. So D is for dupta. It's an abbreviation for baptism. He's baptized on 11 November 1861. The K is for confirmation. He's confirmed in 1877 on the 1st of July. And then that final, all the way over to the right here, is the day he's leaving the parish. So it's clear that Ingebret is from this parish. So he's from Tolga Parish, where this moving out record is from. And clearly the priest has just gone through other records and filled all this information in. So this is like an incredible record, because we have everything we need to know about Ingebret. We know he's going to the US in 1879, and we know the date he's leaving. Most Scandinavian countries maintained fantastic lists of immigration. They started different time periods. The Norwegian police started 1867 on. The police generally were put in charge of immigration, because people were getting taken advantage of. And so the police were put in charge of that process. And again, they capture name, residence, sometimes a specific destination, like a town in the US. So this database, I'm sure you've run into, is on Ancestry. It's also on Digital Archivet as well. So let's see if we can find Ingebret leaving. So if we remember, he's born 21 September 1861. He leaves Tolga Parish on 28 May 1879. And so I searched that Norway immigration database on Ancestry, and I come up with a pretty good match for him. So this Ingebret's leaving Trondheim, which is a major port of departure for Norwegians. It's about 70 miles to the north of where he is from, Tolga Parish. And if we look here, we have his name, his age, the home parish, so Tolga, and his destination. And if we look closely here, he gives a specific place as Stillwater, Minnesota. And we can see that this ship is leaving 18 June 1879. So about 2 weeks after he's leaving, you kind of have to factor in, he's got to get himself together and possibly make it up to Trondheim by train, or probably by train somehow, but it's not a short distance that he's going. So all of this information corresponds to that moving out record. So we're looking for consistency in our records to make sure we have the right person amongst these common names caused by the patronymic surname system. Another fantastic source for Norwegians is the Big Boker. It's a community history of genealogies. So it notes property ownership and movements too. There's a lot of digitized Big Boker online. There's many fantastic collections at libraries in the Midwest. So if you find that your parish has a Big Boker, you can try to get it from interlibrary loan. I've written about a little bit more about the Big Bokers and how they came into play. It's on the handout, along with some links to some digitized books and some libraries that have really great collections. So we're going back to Sheilagh Parish here. This is a typical table of contents. You always see these really great maps with the different farms and villages, and a table of contents. So we have, description about the parish, but most importantly are the farms at the bottom. This is how the book is organized by place. So you have to know where your ancestor is settled. So this gives you a page, and you can just go to that page. So this is an excerpt for Lunda. So the beginning kind of talks about the historical ownership of the town, some of the early settlers, and sometimes topography, the origin of the name. And if we go to the right here, we see the brook, B-R-U-K, and these are the different subdivisions. And underneath there, we have a description of the family living there. So the people who first came there, who their parents were, how old they were, how long they settled there, when they married, their kids. So it's a really fantastic, rich source. It might give you a little bit more biographical information about your ancestor. But again, it needs to be backed up with primary sources. As we can see, this is not cited. Different skill levels of folks, put these together. So, it's really important that you do your work and try to prove that information. So there's a marriage date here, prove that with a primary source. On to Sweden. Sweden sends the most immigrants to the United States. Like its neighbors, it also experiences a massive population boom. I've read that, it could be part of it could have been because of the inoculation of smallpox. So these Nordic countries, there was a push to inoculate folks. You will see vaccination records within parish records. You'll see that on some of the household examinations if someone's been vaccinated. So there's this big boom of population. Farmland is scarce. There's a depression in Europe, and it trickles over to Scandinavia. So, that leads to famine. These are all major push factors. There's also a recruitment of U.S. agents, some to bring Swedes over. So there's another kind of pull factor. So we see this general theme throughout Scandinavia is these rising populations, not a lot of adequate land to support them, depression, instability that leads to immigration. Like Norway, fantastic genealogical sources. You can find so much about your ancestors from these records. Like I said, the Swedes are largely Lutheran, so these same sources are available for most Lutheran countries. I'm sure folks have seen these records. They're my favorite, and I think they're some of the best ones that you can use in Swedish genealogy. It's the household examination record. Starting in the 1680s, every priest had to record each household, and they're like mini censuses. They record where they're living, name, biographical information, again, the vaccination, the smallpox vaccination, and when folks are moving from farm to farm. I'm sure folks have run into them. They're searchable on Family Search, Ancestry, some on MyHeritage, and all of them are available at the Swedish National Archives. These searchable collections, most of them start in the 1880s, but you will find them again all the way back until the 17th century. It's always important to understand land divisions when you're doing research. Just like in the US, when we have to understand mother and daughter counties, you have to understand land division. So you will see land division language in these household examinations. The word you might see a lot of is ruta, which is spelled R-O-T-E, and it's generally like a smattering of farms. So several ruta make up a parish. I've linked, I think for most of the countries, I've linked the jurisdiction changes, how things are organized. You'll see court records organized, land records different ways. So before you even think about tackling these records, understand how things are laid out. So let's take a look at a household examination record. This is spans the years 1871 to 1875. So we have the name and the status. So the name and their occupation, birth date and birthplace. At the top, we always have the farm where these folks are living. We have if they're married or widow or widower. And then the column over, flytted, that's moving. So where did they come from before they moved to this farm? And then over to the right here, we have where are they moving to? So this is like I'm extracting the most rich genealogical information here. There's some other information about religion, if they can read catechism or they're taking communion or things like that, but that's generally not as important to what we need to know in here now. So if we look a little bit where these arrows are here, we want to look at Victor Alfred Gustafsson. And so we can see he's crossed off here. And when folks are crossed off, that means that they died or they moved somewhere else. And if we look from column to column, we can see that this second arrow here in the move from parish, there is it's FOL, so for folio, page 62 and a date. And if we look there, it's 24 October 1874. So this means that Victor has moved to this farm from another part of the parish on that date. And the parish priest has recorded that. All the way to the far right, this far right arrow here, this is if he's moved from this farm. And we can see that he's moved. It has a place name, a date, and a number. So this means that Victor has left the parish on 6 October 1875. And this number 4 here will correspond to the moving out record. Generally, if someone stayed in a parish, the priest will just write folio. So he'll just write, oh, he moved to a different farm. That household examination is on page 12. And he'll note that. So we can see how all these records work together. When you see page numbers on Scandinavian records, it's really important to note them because it's going to save you so much time. These records are, they're so organized and comprehensive that they are referring to one another. So this is the household examination. This is Victor before he moves. So again, we knew that the parish priest said, look, oh, hey, he moved from somewhere else, check out page 62. And here we have the top page 62. And here's this little notation for Victor Alfred Gustafsson. And over to the right here is folio 10, which is just where we were. So we can see how we can go back and forward to learn more about our ancestors. And again, this is how we conquered those common names, is we link everything together through these household examinations and moving in and out records. This is the best place for Swedish records. It's the Swedish National Archives. So what we do is we type in the county and the parish on the left here, and we're brought to a page that looks like this. it can be pretty overwhelming, but we can see all the different types of records that we have available to us in this parish. And it's pretty amazing. We have marriages and banns, confirmation books, baptisms, moving in and out records, emigrant lists, parish lists, things like that. So, your Scandinavian ancestry, you're, in my opinion, some of the luckiest folks in the world because you have these at your fingertips. So what we do is we want to find him leaving, Victor leaving, because we just found where he lived before. So if we pop this open here, and this is a pretty typical moving out or a departure record. So if we remember before, he was listed at entry number 4 in 1875. And if we scroll down to the bottom here in 1875, we see number 4, and there's Victor Alfred. And it's listed his former, the first place is always where he's leaving and where he's going to. So again, this is, not to sound like a broken record, but this is how we tackle those common names, is linking everyone together, paying attention to those. The priests have done all the hard work for us. They've given us that information, those page numbers, and it's our job to just locate the page, save us, the trouble and all that extra effort. So this is just a great example of how these records work so well together. This is in my opinion, the best guide your Swedish roots. I have a copy on my bookshelf. I have it on my desk at all times when I'm doing Swedish research. There's really fantastic case studies, vocab lists, explaining why records were made, reasons for emigration, things like that. So get it from interlibrary loan or thrift books or, your local bookstore, and do yourself a favor, because there's really fantastic information in there that will help you be a better researcher. So on to Denmark, much less numbers of immigrants. There's probably more. Some people, all told, there's maybe about 350,000 throughout the 20th century that come from Denmark. But, this is the prime waves between the 1850s. The Danes settled in the US for different reasons. If we look at Denmark, it is such a smaller country than, Sweden, Norway, and Finland. So again, they already have less land to support a booming population. And just like other Nordic countries, their population booms. They lose Schleswig and Holstein, which are their southern territories, to Austria and Prussia in the 1860s. It's the German-Danish War of 1864, also called by a few other names. Those are the most prosperous provinces. And so they lose those. And that's, kind of takes a hit to the economy. Also, there's the Danes that are living in that province do not want to be under control of Prussia and Austria. So they immigrate farther into Denmark, already putting more pressure on a, overburdened population. There's also, there's several European crises in the 1860s and 70s. A lot of Danes abandon farming and become, do animal husbandry, and that turns into dairy farming. This is a big thing in Denmark, but to support large production of mechanized dairying is expensive. And so that, a lot of Danes leave. You will see that as a common kind of practice in the US is Danes are dairy farmers. So they've kind of brought that knowledge over. And then also, thousands of Danes also join the Church of Latter-day Saints and make their way out to the, middle and western parts of the country. There are specific sources. If you think your ancestor was a member of the Church of Latter-day Saints, there are specific genealogical resources for them. But, that's another country another reason for folks that immigrated. Again, fantastic genealogical resources, much like their, neighbors, Sweden and Norway. They are, I think Denmark is a little bit slower to digitize some of their information than Danish National Archives, but generally speaking, Family Search and Ancestry have really great collections as well. So, tons of information at your fingertips. I think one of the best sources that I like using is the immigration lists. Just like in Norway, the Copenhagen police, they maintain lists of immigrants. They're in charge of people leaving the country. And it records really strong information. And what you're looking for is the destination to try to figure out if you can link your ancestor from the US to Europe. So this is on the Danish Immigration Archive website. It's a really great, it's a fantastic website that's also looking to collect letters and photos and things like that. So there's a whole other side to this website, but this is the database here where you can type in to see if you can find your ancestor leaving. And this is a pretty typical return that we get here. We have Carl Peter Rasmussen. So you can't get more common than Carl Rasmussen in Denmark here. His last residence is Tunnerup, and he is heading to Ludington, Michigan. So we have a specific place. So we've lucked out, and we have a specific parish. And he's leaving in May 1902. So, this is a really, a lot of them will just say USA. And if you're tracing Carl Rasmussen to the USA, you're in trouble. But this gives you a specific place here. I like to marry US sources with, Scandinavian sources to link them together to get more information. And here we have Carl. He has taken about a 2-week journey and arrived in Denmark. He's on the ship named the Island that corresponded to his Copenhagen police entry here. So we know it's the right Carl. And if we pop open this passenger record here, we see Carl listed as the second entry here. He's headed to Ludington, Michigan to join Rasmus Larsen. And then if we look at the entry above, there's also a Nils Rasmussen who's headed to that same place. So, if for some reason we're having a hard time learning more about Carl, then we can turn to Nils Rasmussen and Rasmus Larsen to learn more about Carl. Researching these gentlemen may, give specific origins, parentage, things like that. So these are a part of his cluster. So, again, this is a fantastic strategy. One of the most powerful strategies in breaking down brick walls is cluster research. And always check your Hamburg passenger list too. A lot of Danes left through Hamburg as well. So they're not just leaving out of Copenhagen. And for that matter too, if you have Swedish ancestry and you can't find them leaving the country, some Swedes also went through Copenhagen. So, cast a wide net. If you feel like, you have an ancestor that's leaving in the 1890s and they should be captured on some passenger list, broaden that net. And finally, Finland. And again, Hamburg is listed as a database on ancestry. So it's a handy at your fingertips here. And finally, with Finland, I'm looping them in, not always considered a Scandinavian country, but we're going to talk about them this afternoon. So one of the biggest push factors is that Finland comes under Russian rule in 1809, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. Before that was a part of Sweden. There is a climax in the late 1800s, 1890 onward, for independence from Russian rule, which leads to a lot of instability, poor economic conditions in Finland. There's a famine in the late 1800s. So that's sort of a driving force for Finns to leave. And in the late 19th century alone, Finland loses 10% of its population. So you see folks kind of flooding out of the country. So it's part of Sweden until 1809, and that's important to know because many records will be written in Swedish. Their Finns are largely Lutheran, so the parish record system will be the same. And Western Finns adopted the patronymic surname system. So this is why I'm looping them in with Scandinavians, because though they may have, be more considered Slavic and they have a different type of language, many of their genealogical practices are Scandinavian. So the Finns finally gain independence in 1917. The biggest thing about Finnish surnames, and I think some folks had questions about this, there's two different surname systems in Finland. The Eastern Finns, so this is a nice map that I found on Family Search that someone created, and it's just a rough kind of guess, but to the right of that line there, the Eastern Finns, they have a fixed hereditary surname system. So just like, other countries, Anglo countries have a fixed hereditary surname. The Western part of the country is more influenced by Sweden. And so they have a patronymic surname system. So that's important to know. Like if once you figure out where your family is from, you have to understand there's two systems going on here. And I've linked a lot about Finnish surnames on the handout, some great name studies and wikis as well that help guide you because they're completely different. The suffixes and whatnot are different in Finland. So in some places you will see son and daughter, so and generally in Western Finland, but you will also see poika for son and tutar, which is suffix meaning daughter. You will also see the suffix of nen, and that's, the most popular surnames in Finland have nen, and it shows possession of sometimes a person or a place. Other places, Finnish surnames have a locative suffix of la with the diacritic mark. So if you have ancestors in the US that have the nen suffix or have a name, with that's Makela, that's, you very much likely have a Finnish surname. And this is the only country where I think you can judge the surname, the suffix of on the surname and understand where the family might be from. This is a really helpful Family Search wiki on Finnish surnames. Bookmark it if you have Finnish ancestry. It's really helpful and very clear and easy to understand, a complicated naming system. And again, you have amazing sources at your fingertips: Lutheran church records, census records, probate, everything you can think of. There's a really great tax records. So everything's at your fingertips here. And, for our last brief case study here, we're going to be looking at communion books. And these are created to record when folks were taking communion by parish priests. But the result is that they're just like household examination books. And that, it's an indirect result that we have these fantastic collections. And again, you will see pre-1863, that's when Finnish was declared the official language. You'll see things written in Swedish. So a big Scandinavian influence on Finland, despite the differences in surname systems and language. So this is a communion book. It looks a lot like a household examination record in Sweden, and it follows a lot of the same kind of form here. We have the farm at the top. Within the village where these folks are living, it records date of birth, where people are coming from. There's a reading section here, and every year Finns would be tested on different religious and spiritual knowledge. So there would be, like, if they knew the 10 Commandments or Bible history, things like that. Sounds super stressful, but they would be graded as such. So you can learn some biographical information about your family other than their birth, marriage, and death. And all the way to the right is left. So this is, a document that captures all the biographical information of our family and when they're leaving. And so if we take a closer look here, so we have, let's see, we have Johan Andersen here, and you'll see an H in front of him. So that means husbanda, or master, head of household. And below him is hustru. So you'll see that abbreviation there for wife. Again, Scandinavians love their abbreviations. A lot of them are found in the handouts and in the manuals that I'm suggesting. So you can just open up a page in those guides and you can get those abbreviations there too. And if we see there's a little bit, there's a cross there that's right next to Johan's name. So if we just mind going back one, sorry. So that means he's died. So if we trace him all the way over to the right, there's a DOD that's died and the date that he died. So Johan has died. So we're getting a vital record replacement from this record as well. And his wife is Carolina Wilhelmina Martinsdottir. And if we trace a little bit over here, there's a remark there that the priest has written. And Enka is widow. Linsing is like bands. So she or married. She bands were put forth in 1877, and then there's a page 138. So this means that she has remarried. And if we go all the way back to the left here, there's a little check mark at the very left. That means move within the parish. So there's a whole system of check marks. If someone, immigrated, left the parish, died, things like that, whole system within these communion books. Those are available in, there's a guide that I'll be linking at the end here. But so Carolina has remarried, and she is now listed on page 138 in the communion book. So let's go to page 138, and here we are. She's moved to a new place, and we can locate her down here at the arrow there. So there's Carolina. So let's take a closer look at the next page here and zoom in. So there's Carolina. She's moved in, and it looks like she's married a gentleman up here at the top. She has married him on 27 April 1877. So we can see these little dates here. That date corresponds to that prior communion book where we knew that bands were being put forth or she was getting married. And that's because this gentleman's first wife has died. So we see that cross by her name. And if we trace her all the way over, that's her date of death. So this is how these communion books work. They work a lot like Swedish household examination records, but it's a really great way that we can trace our ancestor from place to place, parish to parish, or even when they're immigrating. So we have these really rich genealogical collections in Scandinavia, but before we can go and use them, they are complicated. It's a different type of system that we might not be used to. So it's really important to understand them and do as much homework as you can before we use them. And finally, this is this guide, the Finnish Genealogical Research. I think this is the best guide. It's does a really great job of talking about context, historical context of the church, why records were created. You have those vocab lists. The explanation of the moving marks is also included there. So again, it's available on archive.org. You can borrow it for an hour at a time. So that's super handy as well. But again, it's worth a purchase if you have Finnish research, Finnish ancestry. It's a really rich, helpful source. Again, of all the Scandinavian countries, and I know that Finland is Scandinavia adjacent, they're the most complicated. The language is much more difficult to read. There's different naming patronymic practices is only one part of the country, different types of surnames, place names, very locative surnames. So this guide will help explain everything to you. And so just to have a brief conclusion here, it's so important to do an exhaustive search in the US. Get your hands on everything that you can and do that hard legwork. If you have to, visit a local archive or order it, and it has been digitized, make sure you do that. And think outside the box. Use cluster research strategies to learn more about the folks that your ancestors interacting with. Because if you do, you might be able to break down that brick wall. And as always, use those guides and blogs to navigate. I've listed some really helpful blogs on the handout that I go to a lot. There's videos, there's how-tos, how to tackle records. And, you get better the more and more you do this. So the more you read the records, the more they become a little bit more intuitive. The handwriting becomes easier. And as always, I tell everyone to stay organized. It's easier said than done, but it will make your life a lot easier and you'll be a more successful genealogist.
All right. Thank you so much, Sheilagh, for that fantastic presentation. So much great information there. So we will be getting to all of your questions very soon. I know we've had a lot of great questions coming in, but first I just want to give you a quick preview of some upcoming events that we have. So first here we have an online course on using court records in your family history research. That is taking place on Wednesdays this month, and it's not too late to sign up for that. Then on September 14th, Dr. Nathaniel Lane Taylor will give a free online webinar on an introduction to heraldry for genealogists. And then finally, you can join us on September 21st to hear from author Taya Miles as she discusses her book, Wild Girls: How the Outdoors Shaped the Women Who Challenged a Nation. You can learn more about all of these and all upcoming events at americanancestors.org/events. And now we'll go ahead and get to a few of your questions here. I know we're in a little bit of overtime, but you've had great questions, so we'll get to a few of those. So first, Sheilagh, I saw a few questions come in. I know that you mentioned that all of the archive sites, like the Archives of Norway, have English versions of the site. But people were wondering, do you search in English and will the results come in English?
So that's a great question. I think the most of the websites of these national archives are pretty forgiving if you don't have Norwegian or Swedish characters in there. I always recommend searching if the place name has a Scandinavian character, alphabet character, trying to mirror that, because I think you'll be more successful. But generally speaking, if you put it in there without them, it'll come up. I do think if you're doing, like we talked about, the Norwegian, that federated search of transcribed records, I do think you will be more successful if you put the characters in there. But generally speaking, they do have, they've done a good job of accommodating English users. So, it's kind of a gray area answer, but try to put the characters in there if you can.
All right, great. Thank you. Another question that I saw coming up a few times is folks were wondering how early, or rather, how far back do immigration and naturalization records go for the US?
That's a very good question. It's not something that I know off the top of my head, but I do think, they certainly exist for the 1800s. You might find some very simple ones for the 1700s. But again, they're not going to have rich information. So say you have, one of your Norwegian ancestors is coming in like 1820, it might just say, the Kingdom of Norway and Sweden on there. You're not going to have witnesses or passenger information. So it be the, as more and more folks come in, there were processes, put in. Usually the states handled immigration, and then, a kind of a function of the INS in the 1890s took over, making it a federal process, passenger records anyway. And then 1906, the beginning of the INS standardized naturalization. So you're in more luck if folks came later. Sometimes you will see like oaths of allegiance to I'm thinking about like Germans in Pennsylvania, something like that, which would at least place your ancestor in a specific place at a specific time, but it might not give you origin information.
All right, great. Thank you, Sheilagh. And then we also had a few questions from folks who are having trouble getting overseas to Scandinavia. A couple people had DNA that they know is saying that, perhaps they're Swedish, and they're wondering just how can you make that bridge when you're having trouble finding the records here in the US and that sort of thing.
Yeah, so this is, that's the hardest thing to do, is to make that connection over to Scandinavia. And some of our, Scandinavian ancestors were, came on the early side. So if they came in like the 1850s or 60s, they might be settling in states, like Minnesota and the Midwest, that didn't have, civil record registration passed. So they might not have those marriage records or those death records. In those cases, that's when you have to rely on those church records. And, they make great vital record substitutions, not only because it'll give, birth information, but might give a place of origin. And the second thing, if you strike out on all the vital records, the church records, there's no naturalization, his name's Carl Hansen, like you can't do anything with that. You have to do cluster research. And that's figuring out if Carl was a witness to anyone's child. Was he a godparent to anybody? Who is he living near in the community? Who's he buying, selling land from? Is he witnessing other people's deeds? Who settled in that community? So when we strike out on record collections, we have to do place-based genealogy, and that's studying the place. Your ancestor could have, ended up in Spring Grove, because they heard there were other Norwegians there and they have no connection to them. But he might have settled there because his cousins were there, his brother was there. So always turn to place-based research when you strike out on records.
All right, great. Thank you, Sheilagh. And then I think we have about enough time for one more kind of quick question here. So someone asked, you had mentioned the birth dates are kind of formatted in that funny way with the slash. And I think we were looking at 18th century documents when you were showing us that. And someone was wondering, are they formatted like that in other centuries, like the 17th, 20th, 21st, etc.?
Yeah, I would say that's a pretty standard way of abbreviating them throughout the centuries. When we're looking at Lutheran church records in the 1600s and 1700s, they're much simpler. So sometimes you'll just get the birth year. And they contain much, obviously they're not standardized, they're much harder to use, but they try to follow that general format of later ones. So you can kind of use the later ones as a guide for the earlier ones, but yeah, you will see that kind of carried through here. And I do see that folks do have lots of other questions, and I've gone far over our time here, but feel free to email me if you have any specific questions. I'd be happy to provide any help that I can. My email is on the handout and also online as well. So I understand that we've gone over here. So if you have any other questions, something I said didn't make sense, or you want me to clarify something, I'd be happy to address them later.
All right, thank you so much, Sheilagh. Yes, this was a fantastic presentation, so much great information here. I know we'll probably want to have you back at some point in the future to do more Scandinavian programming for us because, yeah, just so much to delve into. Yeah, a lot of great information. But yes, unfortunately, this is all that we have time for today. As Sheilagh mentioned, if we didn't get to your question or if you think of one later on, please do feel free to contact us. You can reach us at education@nehgs.org, or you can also chat with our genealogists for free online Monday through Saturday from 9 to 5 Eastern Time. This is a great service and it's open to everyone and again, totally free, and it can be accessed at americanancestors.org/chat. Thank you again for joining us, and you will have an opportunity to fill out a survey and give us your feedback on today's webinar. As we continue to expand our webinars and online offerings, any feedback is very helpful and appreciated. This free webinar was made possible by the generous support of our members and friends around the world. Please consider making a gift to American Ancestors to help keep these programs free and to help create more. If you'd like to access more how-to resources or learn about upcoming online educational programs, please visit our online learning center at americanancestors.org/education. Thank you again, and I hope to see you all at our online programs in the future. Goodbye for now.